Why South Sudan? An Every Village podcast where we answer questions about the world's youngest nation. The question of the day is, what's the difference between a project's mindset and a systems mindset? Hey everyone, this is the host, one and only, Tiana Johnston, here in the studio with the one and only Andrew Brown.
Thank you. I'm not the one and only guest, but I am the one
true.
and only Andrew Brown that's here in this office.
That is very true. I try to change it up a little bit just for funs.
That's great.
Oh man. All right. Well, I feel like it's been a minute since we've had you on here. I guess you were here 2 episodes ago, actually, so disregard on that. But it was a coup. Y'all took over
That's
the
right.
podcast.
Oh, yeah. And it's just, you consider yourself fortunate that we gave it back.
That is very true. Yeah. All right. Well, it is good to have you. So I know this topic we have kind of dibble-dabbled in before. We've talked a little bit about. I know this is something you're very passionate about. This is something I think every village has grown in and I'm very, very proud of. And so, yeah, just thought we could just dive right in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, man, I can go so many directions on this. So let me just do that. No, I was thinking about, I was just trying to think of some examples in the United States. I mean, there's just so many examples of systems here in the U.S. that we kind of take for granted. But let's just take the postal service, which is not always the most, efficient or effective, but still, when you think about it, it's pretty amazing, really amazing. And, then obviously the U.S. Postal Service, but then nowadays with, UPS and Amazon and FedEx and all those, that's even become even more amazing how quickly you can get things on your doorstep or in your mailbox from the time that you ordered it or the time you sent it to somebody else, how quickly they can receive it. That is a very complicated system. Well, in contrast, you could start out and say, oh, I want to, be able to send mail at my house. You could go, if you wanted to move to South Sudan today, you could say, I want to start, being able to mail letters from South Sudan. And you could go and you could buy the brick and get the concrete and you could go, mix it and build a mailbox, right? But what's it going to do? That's that's a project. It starts with it, right? If you don't have a mailbox, where's the mail person going to be able to collect the mail, right? So you do need a mailbox, but it's stupid, right? Because there's no system to be able to, somebody to go get that letter and take it and, all the transport and the training and the process and the cost and everything, right? And that's just an example that we kind of take for granted. It's a very complicated system that our mail and web orders arrive and they don't always arrive in the right location, but for the most part, they're pretty good. And even more amazing that we've ramped it up over the last 20 years in the United States to where it's almost instantaneous. I mean, it's wild. And so, but that takes a very complicated system. And if you have a project mindset, then you're just focused on that mailbox, building a mailbox, and it doesn't connect them. And so I thought that was just an example that came to my mind of, project versus systems thinking at every village. And, something that we talked about, Tiana, when you were in missionary training many years ago, is, we talked about the very well-known phrase that if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And even embedded within that is kind of this notion, right? If you give a man a fish, in some respects, that can be a project. Is, hey, we're going to feed all these people who are hungry, and we're going to give them fish. And yet, obviously, it's kind of a totally different mindset if you teach a man to fish, because that requires education and training, but you're empowering that person to then be able to take it on and carry it on from there. And so that's kind of the difference between project and systems thinking as well. But then in our missionary training, we took it a step further, and I really believe this is important for us in ministry. It's not just teaching a man to fish, because you could give a man a fish and, that might only help him for a short time. You could teach a man to fish and that could provide for him for a long time. But as we read in the book, When Helping Hurts, the primary source of poverty in our world is not a lack of material things. It's a lack of relationships or broken relationships. And so even there, we don't want to just hit and run, train people to fish and then leave them and then they're all alone. But why don't we fish with them and develop that relationship? And then they have fish, they have the education, and they have a friendship along the way, right? And so I would say that's kind of even an extended step further beyond just projects versus systems thinking, but it's relational systems-based thinking and working with people, raising up and empowering people, but also doing it in context of relationship. And that's the ministry component, right? So all of that is kind of the background to our thoughts for working in a place like South Sudan. Now, in South Sudan, it's tough because compared to pretty much every country in the world, they have fewer systems than anybody else. They don't have the infrastructure to connect the population with each other in positive, wholesome ways. And so because there's no roads, the cost of transport is so expensive. And because of that, the cost of commodities and goods is so expensive and frankly, just, not very present. And there's times where there's just shortages because of the lack of infrastructure. And so, road infrastructure is huge. Electricity is so critical. How are you going to be an entrepreneur in so many areas of industry when there's no electricity? South Sudan's got the lowest rating of electricity in the world. And so, you think about those basic core components of a society. And so, but we talk about, access to safe water. That's a big one for us, So roads and electricity are huge, but safe water is maybe even more, it really is even more fundamental than that for daily survival. Well, you could go in and you could drill a water well and say, look, we provided safe water for these people. That's like building a mailbox, though, because the truth is that water well is going to break someday, and there are people that are needed that know how to repair that well. The spare parts are necessary to be able to repair that well. The community has to trust those people to be able to repair that well. They have to have the money to be able to repair it. All these things, right? They're, and this isn't a particularly complicated system at the start, but it becomes quite complicated the more and more you extend it to village after village after village, ensuring a nation has access to safe water. And that requires a systems-oriented mindset rather than a project-oriented mindset. And so that was a big shift that we made, a handful of years ago, when we recognized that, we were also falling prey to that kind of project-oriented mindset of focusing in on meeting immediate needs rather than focusing on developing long-term systems and structures that will, carry the nation forward. And that, we've talked about the difference between relief and development. That is also very much embedded within this snapshot. Building that mailbox in some ways is a relief mindset, but, developing the postal service is that development mindset. And for us in the water sector, of course, drilling a well is, if done, in its most basic form, is typically done in a relief mindset. But developing a clean, safe water system of a water well maintenance program, working with community leaders and government officials and with pump mechanics and all of those different stakeholders in the system, well, that is a systems mindset. And so I love that we get to do that on the water side, and that's obvious. It's just made such a big difference because now, one of the things that we have to get past is we need to get past in South Sudan where women accept seeing a broken water well and walking past it, because that's what has been happening for generations, and that's all they know. They just have accepted a broken system. Well, because there hasn't been anything better modeled for them. Well, our hope and our work is moving towards women not being okay with that, them seeing a broken water well and getting a little upset, but then being empowered to do something about it. Either they have the phone number of the pump mechanic, they can call them directly, or they go back to their home and talk to the chief or whoever it is that knows, and they arrange that to get fixed within a few days. Imagine going a couple of days without water in the United States. That's not easy, but it's a lot better than going months or years. And so we're moving it down from years and months down to days. We'd love to eventually move to where it's hours, but right now we're starting where we are, and so that's a kind of an entire mindset is shifted, not just for us, but for the South Sudanese when they start to see systems that work. The other really critical component to systems that work is trust. And it's just, nowhere in the world are you going to have a long-lasting service provision or systems that work if there's not an element of trust within communities, because all business requires an aspect of trust. You have to believe that the money that you pay will get you the goods or services that you intend it to. And if you consistently don't get that service that you expect from the money, you're going to stop paying. And unfortunately, that's also what's happened historically in South Sudan. On the water sector, I've met many chiefs of villages that were strong leaders. They wanted to provide water for their communities, and they rallied their community together to collect money to be ready to pay for their water well to be repaired when it broke. So they even had all of that vision there. They had the strength of leadership, but they didn't have trust, because they would collect the money and the well would break. The chief would send somebody to the government who have the pump mechanics and the tools, sometimes, not always, but they're the ones that have the best chance of having the tools. And they would pay the government to come repair the well, and those guys wouldn't come and repair the well. Or, they would go steal parts from another well to get some parts, and they'd put in bad parts. There's so many people are being taken advantage of in that old historical system. And so after a while, it's kind of that fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. After a while of being fooled, you stop even trying. What's the point of collecting money? What's the point of going to the government and trying to get this repaired? Let's just, send our women to the next community, their well's working, or send them to the lake, or, to the river, or whatever. Or let's dig our own well, hand dug well, which is not, safe water, but it's water. And so that's, unfortunately, that lack of trust has been embedded within their culture for so many, decades, because of war, because of being taken advantage of, and all those things. So one of the things I love is kind of the difference between a projects and systems mindset is, with a systems mindset, we're not just building infrastructure, we're not just building systems, but we're building trust in communities. And that's so huge. And trust is going to be so much farther reaching than just water. It has an impact on nation building as a whole. One of the issues geopolitically in South Sudan is there's no trust between government officials, and between offices in one state and another state, and between politicians. And so if we can start to see communities trusting one another in access and provision for water, then that will spread to other sectors as well. And so that's a huge one. And then I've been obviously focusing on water because that's the clearest and easiest example of a project versus a system at place. But media is like that as well. Obviously we could build a radio tower and start broadcasting content by streaming from, we could put in a satellite dish and just start piping in content from churches in America. Well, that would be stupid. That's a relief mindset. It's a project mindset, because are the people going to have access to the broadcast? Because where do they have radios? Okay, so they need radio receivers. But even if they have radio receivers to listen to that content, if you're just piping in content from America, are they going to understand it because they don't know the language? Is it going to really touch their hearts because it's not part of their culture? Is it something that they're going to be proud of and love? Will they choose to listen to it because it's very foreign and not really that effective? No. What they want is they want their own media. It's part of their culture, something they love, something that makes them laugh, something that makes them think, something that makes them work together and listen together, right? It's just like, we're not going to watch a boring TV program that's been produced in Korea. I mean, if we don't speak Korean, right? Mm-hmm. It just doesn't make sense. We're gonna choose media input that speaks to us, that we enjoy, that we love, that we want to listen to with friends or with family, or we'll pass on a podcast, hint, hint, to friends that we really think is impactful, right? Well, it's the same in South Sudan. That's what they want in media. So building a radio tower is just the first step of a project. But then you have to, develop the listeners by sending out these solar powered radios. That's kind of the logistical side of gaining listenership. But then everything else that goes into content creation is about raising up South Sudanese leaders within the communities that obviously speak the language, that know the culture, that are part of that community. And they're the ones that are day in and day out speaking to the needs of the people. But then even there, of course, our vision is the spread of the gospel through this, through these radio stations. And so, pouring into our staff and seeing them discipled and growing in the Lord, becoming more like Christ year in and year out, that's not something you can rush. That goes even beyond just teaching them to fish. We could teach them tools of radio broadcasting, but and they could flip on that transmitter every day and they could send out content every day. But that's why in these relationships, it's not just teaching them to fish, but fishing with them, because then you're talking about relationship, discipleship, becoming more like Christ, and really, again, changing a nation. So, radio is such a huge example of a system working at place. And then, we talk a lot about the financing of a radio station, but we want to see communities that love the station so much that they want to contribute to it financially as well. And so that's where, of course, we sell our solar-powered radios. That's a big, part of, the empowerment of the communities. But we also ask communities to donate to the radio station. We have local announcements where people pay to do announcements. All of that is intended to, of course, build up some revenue stream for the station, help towards sustainability financially. But also, it's geared towards helping communities have buy-in and participation and local ownership of that. And that's really the vision. And so, those two things just are examples within our work that require a lot deeper thinking than just going in and putting in the brick and mortar, the project, and patting ourselves on the back. But it requires long-term operations. I tell people, every village has become an operational ministry. We're not primarily an infrastructural ministry. Yes, we build infrastructure to get our jobs done, but once that's built, it's all about the day-to-day operations. And we didn't used to be that way. When we first started, of course, we didn't have staff on the ground at all for many years, and so we were just taking short-term trips. Well, short-term trips, by essence, are projects. They're not systems. You're only able to do what you can do on that during that time. And it can have an impact. You can teach men to fish during a short-term trip, but then you leave. But what we're about now is fishing with men, and that's not me here in Houston. That's our South Sudanese staff. We've got almost 100 staff now in South Sudan that are doing this work day in and day out. And so, truly, our entire U.S.-based team, we could go a full year without traveling to South Sudan, and our work wouldn't slow down a bit. We could experience. COVID was a good example for us. It's like, there were travel restrictions and it was just difficult. It didn't slow down our ministry one bit because our staff was there on the ground doing the work, broadcasting the gospel content, working with communities to provide safe water, working with church leaders, discipling them and with communities. And so none of that slowed down at all because they're members of the community. They are fishing with their brothers and sisters. And so all of those things, I think, are answer to projects and systems. So I hope I answered it well. I could go a lot of directions, but that's kind of my first effort, Tiana.
Yeah. That was great. I really loved the mailbox thing because at first I was like, where is he going with this? I was like, that isn't going to work. So I'm glad that you actually wrapped and put a bow on that. So that is true.
Well, it was a teaser that every village is going to get into a postal service in South Sudan. It'll be our next program area.
That'd be kind of comical.
We're going to start with carrier pigeons, and we'll go from there.
That's hilarious. But so as you were talking and describing projects versus systems mindset, so really kind of what comes to mind is that projects are a little bit easier. They're less messy. It feels good on our end,
For sure. There's a budget. There's typically a clear budget. Now, of course, there's contingency costs and it can go a little above, but there's a start date and an end date to a project. It makes it easy. It makes it, it's satisfying. There's a sense of accomplishment, and that's great. But again, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
what about next year and the year after and the year after? And what about the next generation
Mm-hmm.
and the generation after? And that's what we're working towards. We're working for things that we're not going to see. But a project doesn't do that, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Oh, absolutely. And even how you mentioned about, girls, that we want them to be upset that this water well isn't working. We don't want it just to be the normal, because, I mean, it made me think of us here in America. Like, we all get distraught when our water gets shut off, or when we have no electricity, because that's our normal.
yeah. And that's, I mean, obviously, we should learn in America probably not to complain
Yes.
as much as we do
It's true.
about first world problems. We should have a sense of perspective. But some of our angst over those things is a good thing, because that's what has driven us to find solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have come to recognize that we shouldn't accept these things. That access to water should be something that we can expect for our families. And so, yeah, it is. It's this tension. Like, I think maybe in the West, we need to learn a little bit more long-suffering and Christ-likeness in that the South Sudanese have. But they have a passivity, unfortunately, because of their history, that we don't have. And so they need to grow in that.
For sure.
But it's because they've never been modeled anything different.
Yeah, for sure. Well, even to tie that in with the systems piece, it also takes time, because you have to build that trust. So even though we can come in with a system, that's going to take time, because if all they've ever known is people taking advantage of them and stealing their money and, fixing their well, partially, with broken tools or, broken wires or whatnot. But so, yeah, even systems. So projects can seem easier.
You can tell Tiana knows a lot about water wells since you just put wires into a water well. But anyway.
Maybe there's wires.
You were really struggling there. I was thinking about bailing you out, but it was fun.
I just refer to Brad on all things water wells. It's funny. At least I do. When people ask, like,
these are not electrical water wells, FYI. These are hand pumps, so there's no wires involved. Just FYI.
Yeah, when people ask, like, how deep a water well is, I'm like, I'll get back with you, because I just can't remember. So, but even with that, so yes, projects seem easier, flashier. They're less complicated. But then systems, it takes time. It takes time to build that trust, and for the South Sudanese to now see that the SWC is the new system, and that they can trust it. So.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of joke with people, we're 25 years old this year, which is a great milestone. But it makes us old enough that we've learned from the dumb mistakes that we've made in the past, right? We've done a lot of dumb things, and frankly, I mean, that's just part of the journey. You have to go through those learnings, and so we were part of that kind of that project-oriented thinking. And again, I mentioned, by necessity, for years when you're just taking short-term trips, that's all you really can do, and so you're just trying to make an impact where you can. But along the way, we're old enough now where we have worked through those things. We've envisioned systems and raised up South Sudanese to lead those systems, and now we're seeing it working. And so, that's where we are as an organization. Well, now it's our prayer that the South Sudanese start to experience that too over the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and beyond. They're going to start to just accept things the way they should be. That is, man, I'm going to have water today. Right now, they don't know that. They don't. Or my children will be in school today. They definitely don't know that. Or, I'm going to be able to go to church on Sunday. They don't necessarily know that because of so many factors. Mm-hmm. We want, in some ways, you might say, we want the South Sudanese to experience a more normal life, the normal rhythms that are a sign of health and prosperity. Right now, they're living day to day. They can't count on anything for the future because they're just trying to scramble. But that's changing, and you see it, and that's been really neat. And we've been working there long enough where we are starting to see South Sudanese, their expectations are different, and that's a really cool thing, because you realize what's happening is culture shifting, mindsets are shifting, and that And that's what nation building looks like. So anyway, that's cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, if anybody wants to go back and listen to episode 74, where we talk about generational change, and I mean, that's, I think, project mindset versus system mindset is exactly is that we're focused on the generations to come. And so well done. You just are just a plethora of knowledge.
I'm a plethora of opinions, let's say it that way. And some of those opinions hit and some don't.
That's true. Oh, so good. Well, it's always good having you here. And also, you kind of segued into the next episode as we are going to answer the question, what are things every village does best?
Oh, very good.
Stay tuned. Take care.